Chapter 2: The reactions to one's actions. The Sandaime Hokage was angry and sad at the same time. Tears were streaming down his face as he sat in his office. The pain of failing not only Minato and Kushina, but also Naruto had hurt more than anything else in his life. He had let the one thing that Minato left behind to suffer a life worse than death. He allowed himself to be pushed around out of fear and senile belief that they would honor Minato's wish. He should have done what was done with Kushina and Mito and kept it a secret, but since he didn't, the innocent boy had to suffer and die at an age that no child should. When he finally managed rein in his emotions, he signaled Kakashi, Kurenai, Itachi, Anko, and Yugeo forward and told them the truth of Naruto's heritage and told them everything about his godparents. Kurenai, Anko, and Yugeo started to cry while Itachi's eyes were moist as a small trail of tears fell from Itachi's eyes. Kakashi though held his head down in sadness as much as he wanted to cry. His tears were already spent with his red eye as proof showing that he had been crying for a while. When all of them had regained control over their emotions, he signaled the Anbu hidden in the room away and said, "I want all of you to go on a ranked mission for me. I want you to track down Tsunade and Jiraiya and get them back into the village as soon as possible. I plan to make them pay for ignoring their duties as Naruto's godparents when they should have been here and done more. But I let my own belief blind me to what I should have done and forced them to at least come back and check up on him. If they don't come back through persuasion, then give them a threat. Tell them that if they don't come back, then I will mark them both as S-ranked missing nin." The Sandaime had a dark look on his face as he handed them the letters, saying that if they don't come back, then they will be marked as S-ranked missing nin. The assembled ninjas nodded their heads with determined eyes and then left the office to bring back the Sannin that were supposed to watch over Naruto. Despite all the good that Jiraiya's spy network did in protecting Konoha, he never even bothered to get to know his own godson. He should have forced Tsunade to come back and helped her get over it, but he didn't, simply letting her do what she wanted. Sarutobi down at his chair and looked at a pile of paperwork. He then sighed as a memory of what happened a couple years ago when Naruto went to the park. He remembered the way the civilians and shinobi alike stared at him when he arrived at the playground. Naruto walked towards the center of the park, but stopped when he noticed the stares that people were giving him. He then crumbled his hat as he remembered his hat as another memory entered his head. He remembered a child probably a year or two older than Naruto punch him in the face. The two child began to fight with other kids joining in the battle. It soon became an all-out brawl, all the kids beating up the blonde. Sarutobi got himself ready to help Naruto stop, but stopped when he saw the parents come up to their children and lead them away. But his blood froze when instead of hearing the parents reprimand their children for beating up the blonde, they congratulated them instead for the deed. Sarutobi raised his hands up toward his face and covered his face. That memory wasn't the first of a time he didn't help the blonde out of a jam. It was one of several others where he didn't help him out of fear. Fear of being of the part of the minority that didn't see him as the demon. When he saw Satsuki and the other members that were part of his Anbu and some Jonin help the blonde, he had wished that he had their courage to do what they could. He had wished countless times that he had the strength and courage that they had, the strength and courage that proved that they weren't afraid to be part of the minority. But then again, he was the one who had set the line when he followed Minato's wish and told everyone about the Kyuubi. He should have done what was done with Mito and Kushina and kept it a secret that only he knew, then he wouldn't be afraid to be part of the minority. Minato, what use was the peace you gave us, if we can't thank the one person who you wanted to be seen as a hero for giving us this peace most of all? Sarutobi had tears falling down his cheeks as he remembered Naruto, who was sitting by himself as tears fell down his cheeks. Minato, your child had done nothing to deserve this fate, no one deserves to die so young, but with what you did to him. You had cursed him to a life of hell by not letting me or Jiraiya do it. He then thought of what Minato truly did to his own son and what the term Jinchuriki truly meant. Jinchuriki was loosely translated and meant human sacrifice. Jinchurikis weren't a sacrifice because they were given to the demons. They were a sacrifice because they were sacrificed in the name of peace. They were the very scapegoat for the leaders of villages and civilians alike. They were the very physical manifestation of the people's fears. They were sacrificed not to the demon, but to the very populace that they worked to protect. The Jinchurikis weren't a sacrifice of their own will, they were called and forced to be a sacrifice. They were called to sacrifice any semblance of a normal life, sacrifice their families and sacrifice any precious bonds that they might have had with someone else. The very fate that Minato had casted on Naruto the night the Kyuubi attacked Konoha, the very fate he casted on his own son. He then crumbled his hat more as the tears fell freely down his face. Minato, you stupid fool, you stupid and noble fool. Why did you have to be so stupid and leave your own son alone in this world that many would hate him for what you did to him despite your wish? I'm Lord Hokage, a bare-masked Anbu said worryingly as he entered the room. He had heard of Naruto's death and knew that the Hokage had held the boy not only in high regard, but also very close to his heart as well. He didn't want to do this and tell the Hokage that the council had called for his presence, but was afraid of what the council would do to him if he didn't. The Hokage turned to the Anbu, but couldn't hide the tears that freely fell down his face. The Anbu felt saddened when he saw those tears and feel a pang of sadness hit his heart. He, like a few others, didn't see the boy as a demon and saw him as a person who was cursed at birth with being the container of Kyuubi. The only one of said group that didn't know of his condition was the small Uchiha girl who seemed to be the only child around his age that accepted him. What is it, Bear? The Hokage asked in strained voice. The Anbu was quiet for a moment and sighed as he gathered the strength and said, Lord Hokage, the council has requested your presence on the matter of Naruto Uzumaki's death. The Anbu looked up at his leader waiting for his reply and saw that the Hokage's head was down. When the Hokage raised his head instead of the eyes of a broken man, he saw the eyes of a man who looked ready for war. The tears still streamed down his cheeks but his eyes showed iron will that would break only in death. The Hokage turned toward the Anbu and felt like bowing, feeling the aura of the shinobi that was known throughout the world as the god of shinobi. Tell them I will be there soon after I settle some things. The Anbu nodded and quickly left the room using the shunshin. After the Anbu left, Sarutobi turned and looked at the fourth's head on the Hokage monument. Minato, I'm sorry that I didn't have the will to protect your son until it was too late to do anything to protect your son. I will not have your son be remembered as the Kyuubi's reincarnation. And for that I most break what I thought I would never do until he was a Chunin, but he cannot be harmed by Iwa and Kumo when he is already dead. It is time that the people learned of what they had done to the savior. The last though that the Hokage had before he left the room was, Naruto, I hope you can forgive this old fool for not having the strength and courage to be there for you. I hope that you can forgive me wherever you are. Council chambers. The Hokage made his way toward the council chambers with a face that seemed to be set in stone in a will made of iron. When he reached the door to the chambers, he opened the door and made his way towards his chair in the chambers with the intent to make sure that Naruto would not be remembered as the Fox Reborn, but as the hero who the people of Konoha had scorned, beaten, and in the end killed. They would know that they had did an unredeemable act by what they did to him, that no matter how hard they tried, the stain of such an act would never be removed. They had not only killed a child, but the son of their hero who they saw as a hero, but had damned the one thing that he had left behind and wanted to be seen as a hero. The Hokage would make sure that they know that even if it took a river of blood for them to understand their crimes. After the Hokage sat down in his chair, a man on his left who was one of his former teammates known as Hamura Midakato. Hamura was depicted with gray hair, a beard, glasses, as well as a constant frown that he's had always worn, even in his youth. He also had a strong jawline, a facial structure he had retained even in his old age. As a member of the Konoha Council, he wore similar garbs to those that Hiruzen would when acting in his capacity as Hokage. A woman on his right, where the shinobi side was, sat his other former teammate, Kaharu Udatane. In her youth, Kaharu was a beautiful kunoichi with dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a twin bun locked by a traditional Japanese hairpin with two pearls dangling off the side. In her old age, she maintained her original hairstyle without the bangs. The pearls on her hair needle have also increased and tassels were added to the other end. Her earrings were also considerably longer. As a member of the Konoha Council, Kaharu wore a simple long kimono, closed by an obi, a jacket, and a sash over it. In the back of the room where no one could see him was a man known as Danzo, was Hiruzen's rival since they were kids and was always overshadowed by Hiruzen's accomplishments. Danzo appeared as an old frail man, who would normally walk with a cane. He had black shaggy hair, and his right eye was kept bandaged. Danzo has had an X-shaped scar on his chin ever since his youth. He wore a white shirt, with a brown robe over top of it covering from his feet, to just over his right shoulder. The robe concealed his right arm, which was bandaged, and covered with 3 big golden braces. He looked like a man that had endured numerous battles, but he had a personality that made a brick seem lively. On the right side of the council sat the Shinobi Council, which consisted of the clan heads from the clans that helped made up Konoha's shinobi forces. It consisted of Shikaku Nara, Choza Kimichi, Inoichi Yamanaka, Tsuminazuka, and Fugaku Uchiha, who was Itachi and Satsuki's father and Mikado's husband. On the left side was the civilian council made up of rich merchants and somewhat influential people who had some ties with others. One that stood out had bubblegum pink hair and emerald eyes. She was wearing a pink kimono with yellow trimmings and large earrings in her ears. She was Akimi Hiruno, one of the more influential civilian members of the council. Danzo stepped out of the shadows and made his way towards Sarutobi and said, "Sarutobi, you took quite some time getting here. As the Hokage, you know that you shouldn't keep the council waiting." The Hokage was quiet and didn't even bother looking in Danzo's direction. Danzo, who was annoyed that his old rival was ignoring him, was about to yell at him, but stopped when he felt Sarutobi's killing intent. Everyone in the room was afraid when they felt that killing intent. The last time any of them had felt any killing intent from him was the night when Kyuubi was sealed into him and a member of the civilian council members said to kill Naruto despite him being a baby. "Danzo," the old man said, that sent a chill down everyone's spine. "I am the Hokage, the leader of this village. You are an advisor, which means that you are to give me advice, not tell me what to do." The Hokage then turned away from Danzo and turned towards the civilian members and glared at them. All of the civilian members tensed up and were close to shitting themselves from his glare. The Hokage then said harshly, "I hope you are all proud of yourselves." "Of course we are. We finished the fourth's work. We killed the pink-haired councilwoman started. His son," the Hokage said. Everyone in the room looked at him, and after the realization set in, the clan heads started glaring at him with hateful looks, and the civilians' faces clearly showed that they were stunned, since they had a flabbergasted expression on their faces. Akimi, being the first person to recover, yelled out, "What do you mean we killed his son? He's the demon and we know it," the pink-haired councilwoman screeched. The other council members finally managed to regain their senses. Tsume snarled as some of her teeth and nails elongated as she glared at the man. "Who was his mother, Sarutobi?" Tsume asked. The Hokage looked down and was about to answer when a feminine voice said, "His mother was Kushina Uzumaki." Everyone turned to where the voice came from and they saw Mikoto glaring at the Hokage. The Shinobi Council gasped at that, except the civilian council looked like that they didn't care in the least. The first one to say anything was a balding councilman who had hated Kushina said, "Of course that demon is the son of that whirlpool whore," started but couldn't finish because a kune was lodged between his eyes, thrown by Tsume, which caused some civilian council members to panic. "Hokage," the pink-haired councilwoman said. "That is enough," the Hokage shouted, but then his robes were grabbed by angry Tsume. Tsume looked at him with rage in her eyes and her nails were digging into his robes. Tsume looked ready to kill him and she yelled out, "You bastard. I swore a blood oath to Kushina that if something would happen to either of us we would look after the other's children. What the hell gave you the idea that he wouldn't be safe with me protecting?" The old Hokage sighed and said, "It was for Naruto's protection. If Iwa and Kumo ever found out Minato had a child, then they would have sent assassination or kidnapping missions out for him. Although it seems that it didn't help him in the end. In fact, I wonder what would have happened if I did say something about Naruto's parents. Then maybe he would still be alive and protected by the people. They would have probably seen him as a hero for being his son. Instead of Iwa, Naruto was killed by the very people that Minato wanted Naruto to be seen as a hero by. Minato is probably rolling around in the Shinigami's stomach in pure anger for what this village has done to him. Can you blame him, Sarutobi? Sarutobi, all of us were friends of Minato and Kushina. What the hell gave you the idea that we would do anything to hurt him? I can say for certain that all of us would gladly fight to protect Minato's child. Minato was a friend to all of us and we would gladly fight to protect his children. You had no right to hide this from us," Choza roared out as he glared at the old man. The Sandaime held his head down in shame and said, "I did what I thought was the best thing to do around the time. I wish I could go back and make things right, but I can't." "That's right, you can't make things right," Mikoto said coldly as her Sharingan came to life as she glared at the Hokage. The Hokage shivered at the sight as she glared at him. Fugaku stared at his wife and knew that he shouldn't say anything if he valued his life. If the Sandaime had a choice between being talked to by angry Kushina or Mikoto, he would rather take on angry Kushina. "I hold Naruto's death on your head, Sarutobi, as I told you that day. He deserved better, Sarutobi. You should have done more. The will of fire you had when you are younger is gone in my eyes since you pretty much decided to be the council's bitch. You are not my Hokage. He never knew why he suffered because you kept it from him. Reap what you have sown, Sarutobi, because the blood of an innocent is on your hands because of your actions, Mikoto said coldly. After that she left the room. If she had turned to look back at the man who was the Hokage, then she would have seen tears starting to stream down the old man's face. Nero. Nero was currently walking down the road with his backpack slung over his left shoulder, following the path that the road led down towards the nearest town, hoping to arrive at the nearest town without too much trouble. Nero looked at his gloved hand and then an image of Satsuki appeared in his hand. Nero then balled his hand up into a fist and looked up. Nero then heard something in the forest around him. Nero stopped walking and turned towards the sound in the forest around him and saw several figures rushing towards him. Nero with narrowed eyes stared as the approaching figures with unease. They didn't have a high chakra level, but they did feel unnatural. One of the side effects of his demonic change was not only his new appearance, but from what Kurama had told him, it gave him larger chakra reserve than regular humans and that it had improved his eyesight and sensing. The chakra he was feeling felt foul, corrupted, evil. What was in the forest then jumped out of the cover of the foliage and landed in front of Nero. The creatures looked like large green lizards that stood on their hind legs and had a shield on one of their arms. The creatures hissed at him and Nero cocked eyebrow as he looked at them and thought, Kurama, do you know what these things are? Yes, I do. They are a lower class of demons that are called assaults. They're fast and have the agility to back it up, Kyuubi replied. Thanks, Kurama, Nero thought back. Nero then watched as one ran towards him, thinking that it was going to be an easy kill. Nero stood in the same spot and waited for it to get closer to him. When it was a couple steps away from him, Nero quickly raised his demonic arm and pulled it back behind his head. Nero then launched his fist forward as fast as he could and punched the assault in front of him. The assault was sent flying and skidded across the ground until it crashed into a tree. Nero then blinked out of amazement and whistled as he looked at his covered arm. Kurama, do you have any idea on what this arm can do? Nero asked curiously. Nero wanted to know the full capabilities of his arm and what it could do to the smallest detail. How the hell do you expect me to know what your arm can do? Kurama replied. Because you were sealed inside me before you became my devil arm. Point, but the keyword is was, but I don't know everything about you, like how you kept your true personality that you kept hidden from the world. Nero was about to send another thought to Kurama but stopped when he saw the other assaults rush towards him. Nero jumped away as the slash came down on where he was standing. Nero rolled up the sleeve of his jacket and removed the glove from his hand and placed it in his pants pocket, revealing the demonic arm to the world. Another one of the assaults rushed towards him as another tried to get his right side. Nero then clenched his demonic right hand into a fist and saw that it had a dull blue glow around it. Time to see what this new arm of mine can do, Nero thought. Nero then leaned back to avoid a claw that was aimed at his stomach and grabbed the demon's hand. Nero then lifted the demon up and slammed it on top of the approaching demon's body, slamming them both into the ground. Nero heard several loud cracks and looked down at them and saw that the ground now had several long cracks in the ground, causing Nero to wonder just how strong is he now. But quickly got over it and lifted the demon's body and slammed it into the ground repeatedly. After he did, he lifted it one last time into the air and threw it at another. Nero then looked around and saw more assaults come out of the forest. Kurama, how the fuck do I bring you out? Okay kid, it's very simple, hold your arm out and say my name, Kurama said. Nero stood where he was dumbfounded by how easy it sounded. That's it? Yup, that's it. Now summon me, damn it, and kill these things. Nero placed his demonic arm forward and said, Kurama. A glow came from Nero's right bicep, that was where the tattoo of the fox head was, but it quickly passed and fire arched over his arm and went into his hand. A small ball of fire was in his hand, but then it extended and grew to the point of where it was bigger than his body. The point that grew away from him then launched another ball that seemed to curve into a side-like shape. The fire then seemed to harden and take the form of a weapon that looked like a cross between an axe and a scythe. The weapon had a black curved handle and a long blade that resembled a fang. On the bottom of the handle was a large fox head that had pointed ears and large teeth. The last thing that he noticed on the weapon was that it had a metal chain with a small spike attached to the end of the chain. Nero lifted the scythe and smirked, thinking about how much he was going to enjoy this. Nero then cracked his neck and said, this is going to be easy, is I going to be fun? He then lifted the demonic weapon and was a bit surprised by how light it was. but then remembered that he punched one of them into a tree with a single punch and slammed another into the ground repeatedly. He then rushed forward and swung Kurama into Assault's shielded arm, the Assault believing that the shield would be enough to protect. It wasn't. The side-like axe easily pierced through the shield and embedded itself into the demon's head. He then pulled it out and used the metal fox head on one behind and rammed it into another's stomach. Nero then used his other arm and grabbed the chain and started to spin it over his. The axe flew in the air around him in a circle. It was then that he noticed that the chain grew longer. He then slammed it downwards towards one demon and watched as it embedded itself into its skin. He then pulled on the chain with his normal arm and forced it to come to him and held his demonic arm, except this time a ethereal of demonic arm appeared over. Nero, deciding to ignore the ethereal arm at the moment, cocked his fist back and saw that the ethereal arm did the same. He then launched his arm forward and saw that the ethereal arm did the same. When it collided with the demon was sent flying and skidded on the ground until it stopped. Nero allowed his body to relax as he looked at the dead demons. He then looked at his arm and whistled in amazement and thought, "What can't this arm do?" "I don't know, kid, but you should experiment and try discover everything you can about your arm now that it's changed," Kurama said. Agreed, Nero thought back. He then placed the weapon on his back next to his backpack and continued on the road. After a bit of walking down the road, he decided to ask Kurama a question. "So Kurama, I once read that you and the other Biju were part of the Jubi, right?" "Yes, we were part of the Jubi once, but obviously not anymore." He was powerful and a bit awkward in some regards to other devils. Some devils said that his power was near that of Sparta. But I myself don't believe that. Sparta was fighting for selfless reasons and for his loved ones. No one can beat a man like that easily and expect to win unscathed. The Jubi was awkward. How exactly? Before the cataclysm which led to the shinobi way around your ancestors' time, he saw humans as a weak species that didn't deserve their place. But he found them fascinating due to their inventions and their wars. But one of the things that fascinated him the most were guns. Guns, Nero thought curiously. He didn't know what the weapons looked like, but if the Jubi of all things was interested in them, then they had to be good weapons. Yes, guns which fired what humans called bullets. "Allow me to show, though I warn you now, you will get a bit of a headache." Kurama then started pouring images into his head, which caused his head to slightly hurt. Nero placed his hands on top of his head and saw memories flash through his eyes. A man with large hands was taking a gun apart piece by piece and then build it back together. He then watched as the man then started to make what Nero guessed was bullets for the gun. He then loaded the bullets into his gun and Nero watched as the man fired the rounds one at a time. What the fuck was that? Nero thought. That was bits and pieces of the Jubi's memories each. Oh, the Biju have a piece of him inside of us since we originated from him, so we each have some memories from him and a piece of his power. I suggest that when we stop at the nearest town, we try to find a inn first to rent a room and then a blacksmith to make your own gun. Okay, one last question though and then I'll be done. Why didn't he attack sooner, like before the cataclysm instead of after? He thought that it would be better to wait and attack when it would be easier, when no one could stop him. Think about it, what better time to attack when the bloodline of Sparta is dead or supposed dead? Nero nodded his head, seeing the logic behind it, and continued down the road. He eventually made it to a town and had a small smile on his face. He pulled the glove out of his pocket and rolled down the sleeve of his jacket, covering his demonic arm completely. He then sent Kurama away so that no one would see it. It would look pretty strange if you saw a kid walking into town with a side-like axe on his back, wouldn't it? After a couple minutes he found a inn called the Sleeping Lion Hotel. Nero, thinking that it would probably be for the best, decided to enter the hotel. The hotel was radically deserted on the first floor, but then Nero looked over at the clock and saw that it was close to midnight. Nero then looked over at the counter and saw a woman over at the counter who had a somewhat pale skin color and brown hair. Nero went up to the counter and said, "Miss, can you help me?" The woman looked down and saw Nero and said, "Yes, is there something you need?" Nero nodded his head and replied, "Yeah, I need a room for a couple of days. Can you lend me one?" "Yes, I can. Is it just you?" "Yeah, just me." Nero then pulled some of his money out of backpack and paid for the room. The room was good, better than what he lived in, to say the least. The room had a large bed and had place for him to place his clothes in a bathroom with a large tub. Nero just placed his back on the counter and jumped on the bed, decided to get some sleep. Morning in Konoha. Satsuki ran through the streets with her mother close behind her and saw that people were partying and drinking in celebration of the riddance of what the people were saying, the demon spawn. Satsuki wondered what they were talking about but stopped when she got to Ichiraku's sat in one of the chairs. Hi aim, Tucci, the small Uchiha cried happily, a large smile on her face. The two aforementioned cooks smiled back at the girl, a pang of grief however appearing soon after that only Mikoto saw. No doubt it was caused by the absence of her usual eating partner. Isn't Naruto here yet? Well, Naruto is, the man began, his eyes avoiding the gaze of the small girl. They met with her mother's eyes, which held a saddened look at the reason as to why the boy wasn't here. However, the gazes also held traces of something akin to a plea to keep quiet, as if asking him to stay quiet as to keep the childlike purity that Satsuki still had. He was sent away by the Hokage so he won't be back for a bit. Although the lie worked on the girl, her countenance still fell, but he promised he'd meet me and mom here tomorrow. Satsuki was saddened and Mikoto noticed her daughter's downtrodden expression and tried to cheer her up by saying, now, no long faces. Naruto wouldn't like to see you like this if he was here, so why don't we see a smile, He's always said that he likes it when you smile, even calling you cute, instantly. Satsuki's face broke out into a furious blush that would put a tomato to shame at the thought of her crush calling her cute. After they had a small order of ramen to go, they then made their way back to the Uchiha compound as the people were partying. Mikoto couldn't wait for the Sandaime to make his announcement and tell them that Naruto was the son of their hero, the one they had beaten and in the end killed. Satsuki herself was wondering who or what the demon spawn was. When they passed through the gates, Satsuki bumped into another man and got separated from her mother. She then looked up and found herself looking at another member of the Uchiha clan talking to another man. The first man then said, I know, I'm just glad that brat is dead. Demon brat? Satsuki asked curiously. The man looked down hearing her say that and decided to say, seeing no harm in it. It was just that kid Naruto Uzumaki, he answered, unaware of the spike of killing intent directed at him. Before he could get another word out, he was punched in the face by a furious Mikoto. Mikoto then looked down at Satsuki and saw a shocked face that then turned into sadness as tears gathered behind her eyes. And Naruto, she sobbed out. Fresh tears started to flow like a fountain, as the realization that her best friend and crush were gone. She then screamed out in sorrow for her friend, Naruto. People, I am bringing back several devil arms from the DMC series. Some that I have in mind include Alistair, which Nero or either of the Ox will be using. Alistair is for someone else. However, Nero will be using Pandora, that I can promise. If there is enough reviews for the return of certain devil arm, then I will bring it in later on. One Ock is already fully planned and his main weapon was inspired from Trigun. The second Ock is still in the works but his main weapon is picked. Lastly, if any one of you wants to submit a devil arm idea, then they will have to PM me the details, like what the devil arm can do, its weapon form and the demon form. The Kurama devil arm is a axe-like scythe that a fox head and an iron chain that can grow. Fire can also surround the bladed part of the blade and can use demonic fire techniques special only to it.